What if the date we have been told for nearly 2,000 years is not just wrong, but deliberately simplified to hide something far more precise, far more calculated, and far more cosmic? Because here is the bold claim that immediately changes everything. The Bible itself contains multiple hidden clues that narrow down the real date of Jesus' birth with astonishing accuracy, and when you connect them, December 25th collapses under its own weight. Stay with me, because what you are about to uncover is not speculation or tradition, but a trail of internal biblical evidence, astronomical signals, priestly calendars, and prophetic timing that most people have never been taught to connect. By the end of this journey, you may never see the nativity story, or the sky above you, the same way again. The story begins not with Mary or Joseph, but with a man standing inside the temple in Jerusalem. His name is Zechariah. Luke tells us he is a priest from the division of Abijah, performing his appointed service when something extraordinary happens. An angel appears, not in a field, not in a dream, but at the altar of incense at a specific moment, on a specific day, tied to a rigid priestly schedule that Israel had preserved for centuries. This detail is not decorative, it is a time stamp. The priestly divisions described in the Book of Chronicles rotated in exact order, twice per year, anchored to the Hebrew calendar. When scholars reconstruct this rotation, and it can be reconstructed, the division of Abijah serves in late spring or early summer. That means Zechariah's encounter happens around that time. And Luke tells us that Elizabeth conceives shortly after. This is the first hidden marker, quietly embedded in the text, waiting for someone to notice. But the next part will surprise you even more. Luke then gives us another interval. 6 months later, the angel Gabriel appears again. This time to Mary. Not a random gap, not a poetic phrase. 6 months, exactly. Which places the conception of Jesus not in winter, but in early autumn. And once conception is placed on the calendar, birth becomes a matter of counting. 9 months later does not land in December. It lands somewhere between late summer and early fall. And suddenly the traditional timeline begins to unravel. What comes next may change how you see the shepherds forever. Luke tells us shepherds were living out in the fields at night, keeping watch over their flocks. This one line demolishes December 25th for anyone familiar with Judean climate and shepherding practice. Shepherds did not sleep in open fields during the cold, rainy winter months. They brought flocks into shelter. Fields were not active, night watches were unnecessary. But during late summer and early fall, sheep remained outdoors overnight, especially during lambing and festival seasons. Which means the shepherds themselves are telling us the season, if we are willing to listen. But the next revelation uncovers a secret very few people know. The birth of Jesus is deeply intertwined with Jewish feast days. Not symbolically, but chronologically. Jesus fulfills Passover at his death to the exact day. He fulfills first fruits at his resurrection to the exact day. He fulfills Pentecost with the outpouring of the Spirit to the exact day. Pattern matters. Precision matters. Which raises an unavoidable question. Would his birth, the moment God enters flesh, be random? Or would it align with a feast that celebrates God dwelling among his people? This leads us straight to the Feast of Tabernacles. Tabernacles occurs in early autumn. It celebrates God dwelling with Israel in temporary shelters. The Gospel of John tells us that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and the Greek word used literally means tabernacled, not metaphorically literally. John is not being poetic. He is being precise, and now the timeline locks tighter. What comes next may change how you see the sky forever. Matthew tells us that a star appeared, not a generic light, but a sign recognizable to trained observers. Ancient astronomy allows us to track rare planetary alignments that occurred around 302 BCE, particularly involving Jupiter, the planet of kingship, in conjunction with Regulus, the king star, within the constellation Leo. These events occurred repeatedly over months, culminating in the early fall, not winter. This was not random motion, it was celestial choreography. And the Magi responded not because it was beautiful, but because it was meaningful. But the next part will surprise you even more. Luke also tells us that Caesar Augustus issued a decree that all the world should be registered, a census tied to travel. Rome did not schedule mass population movement in winter. Roads were dangerous. Weather was unpredictable. Harvests were finished by early fall, making travel possible. This places the census, and therefore Jesus' birth, in a warm, travel-friendly season. Once again, the Bible is quietly correcting tradition. And the story only grows more precise from here. Revelation describes a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars, giving birth while a dragon waits. This imagery aligns strikingly with a specific astronomical alignment in the constellation Virgo that occurred around late September in 03 BCE. Sun in Virgo, moon at her feet, a rare configuration that ancient skywatchers would not have missed. Is Revelation speaking only symbolically? Or is it echoing a real celestial sign that once marked the Messiah's arrival? The next revelation uncovers a secret very few people know. December 25th was not chosen because of biblical evidence. It was selected centuries later, likely to counter pagan festivals celebrating the sun's rebirth after the winter solstice. This was a strategic decision, not a historical one. And while the intention may have been evangelistic, the effect was erasure, flattening a precise, prophetic moment into a convenient date. But Scripture never flattens moments, it encodes them. And now, when all these threads are woven together, the priestly calendar, the 6-month interval, the shepherd's fields, the Roman census, the feast patterns, the celestial signs, a window emerges, narrow, consistent, unavoidable, early autumn, not winter, not coincidence. And the implications are far greater than a calendar correction. Because if God chose a specific moment in sacred time to enter history, then timing itself becomes part of the message. Jesus does not arrive randomly. He arrives at harvest, at dwelling, at completion, at the season when God gathers what he has prepared. And the next layer of this mystery pushes us even deeper. Because if his birth was timed with such precision, what does that suggest about future events? About patterns still unfolding? About signs that repeat rather than disappear? The Bible never treats time casually. It treats it as architecture. And once you realize that, you begin to understand why the true date of Jesus' birth was never shouted, it was hidden, reserved, waiting for those willing to read slowly, count carefully, and look upward. And that realization opens a door we have not yet fully stepped through, because the same scriptures that encoded his first arrival also whisper about another moment in time, one that may be approaching far faster than we expect. The story only grows darker and more mysterious from here, because once the timeline narrows and the season comes into focus, another layer of evidence begins to surface, one that hides not in astronomy or history, but in language itself. The Gospel writers were not casual with words. They chose terms loaded with timing, ritual meaning, and calendar awareness that their first audiences would have recognized instantly. And once you notice those linguistic signals, the date of Jesus' birth begins to emerge, not as a guess, but as a carefully preserved secret. What comes next will reveal a hidden truth you never expected, because Luke never actually says there was no room at the inn, in the way most people imagine. The Greek word he uses is not a commercial inn at all, it is a guest room, the same word later used for the upper room of the Last Supper. This suggests overcrowding due to a pilgrimage season, not a random winter night. Families returning to ancestral towns during feast periods would overwhelm guest spaces, forcing births to happen in less formal areas of the home. This detail quietly reinforces the idea that Jesus was born during a major festival season, when movement, travel, and communal gathering were already underway. And the next part will be even more shocking. Because if Jesus was born during the Feast of Tabernacles, the imagery of his birth scenes suddenly transforms. Tabernacles was the only feast where Israel lived temporarily in shelters booths made of branches, open to the sky. God dwelling among his people was not just a theme. It was enacted physically. Imagine the irony. While Israel commemorated God's presence through temporary shelters, God himself entered the world in temporary flesh, placed not in royal quarters, but in a feeding trough. The sign is almost too perfect to be accidental. What comes next may change how you see the angel's announcement forever. The angels do not proclaim peace to the world indiscriminately. They declare peace among those on whom his favor rests. This is covenant language, echoing festival liturgy used during sacred seasons. Angels appear frequently throughout Scripture, but mass angelic announcements tied to joy, light, and divine favor consistently align with moments of covenant renewal. This was not merely good news, it was liturgical timing. And now the pattern tightens again. The next revelation uncovers a secret very few people know. Early Jewish tradition held that the Messiah would be revealed at the time of greatest light, not shortest day. While pagan cultures worshipped the rebirth of the sun at the winter solstice, Israel's theology pointed toward God's presence among his people during the season of fullness, not decline. Autumn, not winter. Completion, not dormancy. This distinction matters because it reveals that December 25th aligns far more closely with Roman theology than Hebrew expectation. And the story only grows more precise from here, because even the infancy narratives themselves behave like clockwork. Luke moves from priestly service to conception to birth to purification rites, all of which are anchored to specific durations in Jewish law. Mary's purification after childbirth occurs 40 days after birth. When Jesus is presented at the temple, Simeon and Anna appear figures who themselves are associated with waiting, watching, and fulfillment language tied to sacred seasons. These are not random characters. They are witnesses positioned at exactly the right moment. What comes next may change how you read prophecy forever. Micah prophesies the Messiah's birth in Bethlehem, but does not specify a date. Why? Because the date was not meant to be declared openly. Daniel, however, gives timelines: 70 weeks, calculated periods, arrival windows. Jewish scholars were actively watching for the Messiah in the first century because time prophecies were converging. This explains why the Magi arrived when they did, and why Herod panicked, not because of folklore, but because expectations were peaking. And now here's where everything locks together in a way that is almost uncomfortable. The birth of Jesus appears to be deliberately placed at the intersection of prophetic time, priestly order, agricultural rhythm, astronomical sign, and covenant festival. Remove any one of these, and the picture weakens. Combine them, and coincidence becomes mathematically implausible. This was not a date chosen after the fact. It was a moment selected before creation itself. The next part will surprise you even more. Because the early church did not argue about the season of Jesus' birth, that debate only appears centuries later. Why? Because the earliest believers already knew the time frame. It was common knowledge among those close to the source. The shift toward December only occurs once the faith expands into the Roman world, where symbolic alignment becomes politically useful. And yet, the original signals never disappeared. They were preserved in Scripture, waiting. What comes next may change how you see time altogether. Because in the Bible, time is not a neutral backdrop, it is a servant. God enters history not just at the right place, but at the right moment. This suggests that future events will follow the same pattern: appointed times, seasons of fulfillment, signs that repeat rather than improvise, which raises a question that refuses to stay buried. If the true date of Jesus' birth was hidden in layers of scripture, astronomy, and ritual, what else has been encoded the same way? What other moments are waiting to be recognized only by those willing to slow down, count carefully, and look beyond tradition? The story only grows darker and more mysterious from here because the same feast patterns that illuminate his first coming also cast long shadows forward toward another arrival, another gathering, another moment when heaven and earth align once more. And that is where this investigation begins to stretch beyond history and into anticipation. Because if God once chose a precise day to enter the world, then time itself may still be keeping secrets that have not yet fully revealed themselves, but are already coming down silently, relentlessly, toward a moment we have not yet dared to calculate. And now, as we step back and take in everything that has been uncovered, the picture becomes unmistakably clear. This was never about arguing over a calendar date or correcting a tradition for the sake of knowledge alone. What we have traced is something far deeper, a divine pattern woven through priestly schedules, sacred feasts, prophetic timelines, human language, agricultural rhythms, and even the movements of the heavens themselves. From the moment Zechariah stepped into the temple, to the quiet months of Elizabeth's pregnancy, to the shepherds watching their flocks under open skies, to the celestial signs that summoned the Magi, the Bible has been whispering the timing of Jesus' birth all along, not loudly, not simply, but precisely. We have seen that December 25th does not rise from Scripture, but from history and convenience, while the biblical narrative consistently points toward a narrow, intentional window, a season of dwelling, fulfillment, harvest, and divine presence. A time when God does not merely send a message, but steps into time itself. The word does not arrive randomly, he arrives on purpose. And once you see that level of precision, you realize something profound. God does nothing casually, not in creation, not in redemption, not in your life. And that is where this story stops being ancient history and becomes deeply personal. Because the same God who chose the exact moment to enter the world is still working with intention today. He knows timing. He knows seasons. He knows where you are, what you carry, and what moment you are standing in right now. If something in this message stirred your heart, if you felt clarity, conviction, wonder, or even discomfort, that is not accidental. That is God drawing your attention, just as He once drew the attention of shepherds, priests, and watchers of the sky. So I invite you right now to respond. Write in the comments a personal confession, a short prayer, or a testimony of what God has done in your life. Speak it openly, share it boldly. Your words may be the very confirmation someone else needs to recognize their own season and their own calling. And I ask you to do something intentional and powerful. Share this message with at least 10 people or more. Not for views, not for algorithms. But because every share is a seed, and every seed carries the potential to awaken a soul. When you share this video, you are not passing along content. You are carrying God's teaching forward, extending His blessing into homes, hearts, and lives far beyond your own reach. This is holy responsibility. Because when this message reaches more souls, it is not information being spread, it is truth. It is light. It is the reminder that God moves with purpose, speaks through patterns, and still enters human lives at exactly the right moment. And just as the true story of Jesus' birth was hidden for those willing to seek, the next chapters of God's work are still unfolding, for those willing to watch, to listen, and to respond. Stay alert, stay humble, stay faithful. Time itself belongs to God. And the story is not finished yet.